Welcome back to A Cup of Ice and Fire. This is Primer Episode 1, a brief history of the world and a timeline of major events. As explained in the series intro video, this first video will be an overview of the world from the beginning of civilization all the way up till the events of our current storyline. And I'd also like to say this video is really made for people who watch the TV show only and maybe just don't have time to read these massive books, or maybe you don't have the money to buy all the books. You still want to know what happens in them, and that's what we're here for. Others of you may have tried to read as many Wikipedia articles as you can, or maybe you've watched other Game of Thrones theory videos right here on YouTube. In any case, this is for you non-book readers. Whatever level of knowledge you're coming into this with, you're welcome here. If you're really well versed in the lore of this series, this video probably isn't going to tell you stuff you don't already know. You can feel free to skip this or stick around and slack off with the rest of us and get a refresher. Maybe there's stuff that you forgot about that might be relevant in the future books. Also, please keep in mind that these are merely the bare-bone facts that you need to know about the backstory being presented here. As we get into theory crafting videos, I'll be sure to add in any of the details I can glean, so if you're an old pro with Song of Ice and Fire lore, then please don't worry or freak out if I don't mention some relevant detail here in this video. I'll get into it in depth in a later video. Oh, and from now on, I'm going to refer to this fantasy planet as Planetos, just because it's too time-consuming to constantly say the world in which the story is set, or whatever. Plus, Planetos fits with the general naming scheme of Westeros and Essos. You get it. And my final note, for those of you who don't read the books, I realize that when I tell you a date on the timeline and I use the terms BC and AC, that might confuse you. But the terms BC and AC are just like when we say BCE and CE for before Common Era and Common Era in our real world. BC means before conquest, and AC means after conquest. And the conquest that refers to is when the Targaryens came to Westeros and conquered most of it. By the way, the Targaryens, if you don't know or don't remember, are Daenerys' ancestors. So year 0 is roughly when her ancestors would have taken over the Seven Kingdoms. So now that I've given you several caveats and bored you to death, I'm finally going to get into it. Let's start off with the most basic questions. What exactly do we know about Planetos? Like, what are the concrete, indisputable facts about this world? Well, this is a planet with at least 4 continents, namely Westeros, Essos, Sothorios, and Althos. Now, most of you are probably scratching your heads, probably because you thought there were only 2 continents, Westeros and Essos. Yeah, well, that's pretty much because they're the only continents that are actually explored in the book series. But there are at least 2 other continents, and sometimes people from Essos interact with people from those other 2 continents I just named. But we'll get into exploring these worlds in episodes 2 and 3. Another thing that we know about Planetos is that the seasons are totally messed up. They can last for months like regular, or longer, and in one special case, even decades, which is not at all how it works in the real world. Here on Earth, our seasons change because of the way that our planet moves around the sun on a slight tilt. But that doesn't seem to be the case on Planetos because the seasons last for variable periods of time. Now, some people on the internet can show you that from a scientific perspective, it is totes possible to have a planet with wonky seasons like Planetos because of things like irregular orbit or extremely wobbly axial tilting. So it's possible that the seasonal flexibility has a totally reasonable scientific explanation. But the author, George R. R. Martin, has explicitly said that the reason for the weird seasons is magical in nature. So just go with that. It's a much easier explanation anyway. And the last thing that we know for sure about this planet is that human civilization started in Essos and migrated to Westeros. So, these are the 3 facts we definitely know about Planetos. 1. There are 4 continents that we know of. 2. Magic ensures that the seasons are all wonky so that they last for varying periods of time. And 3. Humanity, although not necessarily sentient non-human life, started on Essos before migrating to Westeros. From this point on, all the stuff we know about Planetos is given to us readers as stories, legends, and mythology. Even the companion book that's supposed to explain all this stuff, The World of Ice and Fire, is more like a history book from the medieval times than a modern version of how we record history. So, in real life, when we look at stuff written as actual history but from the olden-timey days, we can't really take it all that seriously. I mean, back in those days, they didn't really understand how maps worked or how to accurately report history. And sometimes those medieval historians would straight up lie or fudge the truth to make the kings and popes look good. So because the companion book is written just like those real-life medieval books, we can't be 100% sure that the supposed author of this history book is telling the truth. Hell, he might not even know the truth. Another note is that this fictional history is supposed to be written by a Westerosi scholar named Maester Yandel, so that all this history is seen through the lens of what happened on Westeros, and specifically what the Citadel of Maesters know about history, or maybe what they want the readers to know about history. We mostly found out about Essosi history when it applies to or somehow affects people in Westeros. So we really got to question the validity or bias of the stuff being told to us, at least to some degree. But Maester Yandel's story is all we've really got, and we're working with it. So, what did he tell us about the history of Planetos? Well, I'll tell you. Okay, so history on Planetos is divided into chunks of time called ages, and it all breaks down like this. First, there was the prehistoric Dawn Age, and we don't have too much information about this time period. Then there's the Age of Heroes, and that spawned much of the mythology of Westeros and Essos. After that, the Andals invade and conquer Westeros as the Dragon Lords of Valyria rise in Essos. Meanwhile, the Rhoynar migrate from Essos, and Westeros begins the time of the 7 separate kingdoms. Eventually, this leads to the doom of Valyria and the conquest of Westeros by Aegon Targaryen and his sister wives as they establish the Targaryen dynasty. The dynasty eventually falls after Robert's rebellion, and that takes us up to the events of the books, which are about 15 to 20 years after the end of Robert's rebellion. Simple, right? That's all you need to know. Video over. I'm just kidding. We're totally going to break it down more thoroughly than that, obviously. I know punk-ass Wikipedia entry. So, let's start with the Dawn Age.